The goal of this video is to demonstrate how you can dedicate a particular primary storage or a set of them to a given account without having to duplicate compute or disk offerings. So for example, just like you're able to dedicate a host or a set of hosts to a particular domain or account, in this case, we'd like to be able to take one or more primary storages and dedicate them to a particular account. And then maybe we'd have another set of primary storages dedicated to another account. Now, normally you could do that simply by using storage tagging on the primary storage and on your compute and disk offerings. However, that can often lead to a large duplication of compute and disk offerings. So for example, if you have a primary storage with a storage tag ABC, and that one is only to be used by account ABC, and then you have another primary storage with the tag XYZ, and that one is only to be used by account XYZ, if we have a compute offering that we'd like to expose to both of these accounts, we come up against a little bit of an issue there. Which storage tag do we use? And what turns out is that a lot of times what people end up doing is they'll create a compute offering which is essentially identical but has a different storage tag depending on which account can see that particular compute offering. So if you have, let's say, 100 customers and you want to offer them all their own dedicated primary storages, in this approach, you'd have to actually duplicate those compute offerings that you'd like to expose to all of your users. If you'd have a single compute offering, basically it would need to be multiplied by 100 in this case, so that each of those compute offerings can have the applicable storage tag. Same kind of idea exists for disk offerings, and this can get a little unwieldy. So what the goal here of this particular video is to show you how you can dedicate a primary storage or a set of them to an account and then dedicate another primary storage or a set of them to a different account, and then only create a single compute offering that can be accessed by either account, but have the storage end up on the appropriate primary storage. And that goes for both compute offerings and disk offerings. So now, if you have, let's say again, 100 customers, and they all want the same kind of compute offerings, you only need to make the unique compute offerings. You don't need to repeat them and change the storage tag on each of the repeated compute offerings or disk offerings. CloudStack does not have, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to actually dedicate primary storage to a particular domain or an account in the same way that it can provide that ability for hosts. And so what I've done instead is work within the storage allocator plugin framework to make that happen through a custom storage plugin. In this case, I've replaced the default cluster scope storage plugin, storage allocator with one that knows how to do everything that replaced allocator could do, plus some additional work. So if we look here in the global settings area, I've done a search, I'll highlight it at the top, for the word allocator, and this is what we come up with. Now the bottom row is a list of the storage allocators that we want CloudStack to leverage. We can see here this, I'll highlight it, this second one, and we don't see the full word, but it says account cluster scope storage allocator. That is my custom storage allocator, and I replaced the default cluster scope storage pool allocator with the one that I've highlighted here, account cluster scope storage pool allocator. Now, to make sure that CloudStack does not use both my customization and the original one, I've taken the original one's name, and I'll highlight this row, and I've placed it in this global setting. Again, we can't see the whole name there, but that says Cluster Scope Storage Pool Allocator. I've taken the Cluster Scope Storage Pool Allocator out of this particular global setting that I've highlighted here, and I've moved it to the one I've highlighted here. And then if I go back to the bottom row, we can see that we now have my custom storage pool allocator. So in summary here, we're using the same set of storage pool allocators that you would normally use, with one exception. The cluster one is now being replaced by my customization of a cluster scope storage pool allocator. And mine does everything the old one does, plus this additional functionality, which lets us dedicate a primary storage to a particular account and not have to duplicate compute and disk offerings. Let's take a quick look at the infrastructure tab just to get a feel for my particular cloud here. I just have a single zone, single pod, two clusters, one of which is a VMware cluster, the other is a Xen server cluster. In this particular configuration, I have two hosts in each cluster, and my Xen server cluster is currently running the system VMs that CloudStack needs. I have just a single primary storage at the moment. It's just NFS based, and that's storing the root disks for my system VMs. Just a single secondary storage. We can see my two system VMs. I'll click on this. They're up and running properly. Go back to infrastructure, click on virtual router. This is up and running properly. Go back to infrastructure. So this is at a high level what my cloud looks like. I'm going to perform this demonstration using the VMware cluster. So let's switch over for a moment. I have a Windows VM right here, and it's running vSphere client. So these, we can see cluster C1 is highlighted, and I'll click on these two nodes below that node, and those are my two ESX hosts within the cluster. I'll switch over here to see the data stores. And right now I just have a local data store per ESX host, but CloudStack is not actually even leveraging those. So that's why within the infrastructure tab, we only see the one primary storage, and that one happens to be related to my Xen server cluster. We don't see these data stores show up as primary storage within CloudStack because I'm not making use of local storage within this particular CloudStack cloud. So right now this is kind of where we're at. And what we're going to do is switch over again to the CloudStack GUI. And I'm going to go ahead and add two primary storages. So here I go into the View All area of primary storage. We can see we just have our single primary storage, which is being utilized by my Xen server cluster. In the upper right, I'll click on Add Primary Storage. And I want to add two primary storages, so both of which in this case are going to be at the cluster scope. I only have one zone, one pod. I'll switch to the appropriate cluster, which is my VMware cluster, and I'll provide a name here. Now this is going to be based on a SolidFire volume, so I'll just maybe give a name like SF dash, let's say something like this, but I'll say SF vol dash 1 dash account 1. So this is my first primary storage for account 1. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that. I feel like I'm going to use that in a bit again. The protocol, in this particular case, I'm going to be setting up primary storage that makes use of the what's called the SolidFire shared plugin. And to do that, I need the protocol to be custom. The provider is going to be SolidFire shared. Capacity bytes, I'm going to make this a gigabyte. Now, this field is actually accepting the data in bytes, not gigabytes, so it ends up typically being a very large number. So in this case, it's 1 terabyte. I'm going to provide, my SolidFire volume is going to provide 5,000 minimum 4K IOPS, and to do that, I'll type in a 5 and select 5,000 here. And I already have this in my list. This is the URL field that fills in all of the vendor-specific information that this plugin requires. Really, it just points us to the appropriate SolidFire cluster, gives us the right IP addresses for both the management and the storage planes, the login information, and then the performance characteristics of the volume. One of which is the minimum performance of the volume, which is set to 5,000. And that value of 5,000, which is part of this URL field, has to match the capacity IOPS, which in this case is also 5,000. Now for storage tagging, I'd like to give this, I'm going to paste in what I copied before. I'll just change it slightly to have, it could have the same name as, it could have the same value as the value of the name field above, or it could be different. I'm just going to make it slightly different here. So we've got this SF, which I'll highlight here, SF vol1 account 1 primary storage, that's its name. And then it is tagged very similarly, but with an A at the end instead of a 1. Like I say, you could use whatever you like here. This is just a convention that I'm following for this particular demo. I'll hit the OK button. And in this particular case, the SolidFire shared plugin is going off to the SolidFire cluster. It's creating a volume of the appropriate size and performance level. And then it's going off to our VMware cluster, creating a data store on that. And then when everything is set up properly and both of the hosts in the ESX cluster can see this iSCSI volume with the data store on it, then our primary storage has been successfully added to CloudStack. Let's just go ahead and check on the progress here by switching over to the SolidFire graphical interface. I'm on the Volumes tab. I'll hit the refresh button. We can see that we do have, I'll hover over it, we have a volume with the same name as our primary storage. It's in a particular SolidFire account that maps to a CloudStack account. This is all done automatically. It's put in what we call a volume access group, which means in this case, the SolidFire cluster is granting permission to our 2 ESX hosts to see this particular volume. So everything is set up here. Let's switch over to, go farther to the right, and we can see that the size is in fact 1 terabyte. Farther right, we see that the minimum performance is, as we specified, 5,000 IOPS. So this all looks good. Let's go over to the vSphere cluster, back to my Windows VM. I'll move this pane over to the right a little bit. And we can see we now have, I'll highlight it, a new data store. If I switch over to the Hosts tab, we can see that this has been mounted by both of my ESX hosts. And if I just go ahead and browse this particular data store, there's really nothing in it right now, nothing of interest besides a private folder here. It's ready for virtual disks to be deployed to it. through CloudStack. Let me see again through our CloudStack GUI how we're coming along here. The primary storage is up and running. So we now have a primary storage which we intend on using only by one of our accounts. Let me switch over to the Accounts tab now, and we can see that I do have an account with the name Account 1. I intend on this particular account being able to essentially own the primary storage that we just created. And likewise, I have another account, Account 2, and I'm going to walk through that process in a moment and create another volume which I intend to dedicate to this particular account. But the process of creating that other primary storage, I'm going to follow the same process, use the same SolidFire shared plugin, and then just provide a different name for that particular primary storage and a different storage tag. So since it's the same process, I'm just going to pause the video, perform that, and then resume the video. So I'll be right back. I went ahead and created that other primary storage. It's highlighted in the table here. Now let's take a quick peek. I'll switch over to my Windows VM, and we can see here within vSphere Client, I've highlighted a node on the left-hand side. That's our new data store. And under the Host tab, we can see that it's been mounted, the VMFS volume's been mounted from both of the ESX hosts. So this all looks good. Let's go back to the CloudStack GUI. And now we need to go and create a compute offering that makes use of these two primary storages. In the Service Offering tab, in the upper right, I'm going to click on the Add Compute Offering button. Let's put in a name like CO1 for Compute Offering 1. And I'll just put in something simple here. I'll make a very simplistic offering, just one core, 200 megahertz, 128 megs of RAM, and I won't worry about these other settings. The only thing we really need to pay attention to that's unique for this particular case is the storage tags area. Now here, and I'll explain this in a moment, I'm going to type in SolidFire to account. That is a special tag that our custom storage allocator is going to be looking for. So at this point, as long as I have that tag, you can fill in your compute offering however you'd like. And I'm not going to, you could either click on public here or just leave it unchecked and leave it available for the root domain. I'll just leave it unchecked for public and just leave it available to the root domain. Now I'll go ahead and click on the OK button, and in a moment we'll have our compute offering. Now our compute offering does have that storage tag, and I don't currently have any primary storages that are looking or are actually saying that they support that storage tag. So let's go over to the Infrastructure tab, click on View All for primary storage. I'll pick the first primary storage that we created and click on its name. I'm going to go into Edit mode, and we can see here this is the storage tag that we had originally provided. Now this is something you might be familiar from if you were trying to dedicate a primary storage to a particular account simply by using storage tagging. You would have given your primary storage a unique name that only that particular account would then utilize. So maybe you'd have 10 primary storages, they all share that unique special tag, and then your account would use a certain number of compute offerings which also use that tag to make sure that the virtual disk ends up on the appropriate primary storage. The only problem with that approach is if you do create a compute offering like we just did, and you have 100 customers, now I need to have 100 essentially the same compute offerings, only varying by their storage tag. In this approach, I'd like to be able to create just a single compute offering and use that special storage tag, which I had noted was SolidFire to account, and make sure that my primary storage that is owned by the account that's actually spinning up the VM or creating the data disk, to make sure that it still has the virtual disk end up on only the appropriate primary storages, but without having to duplicate compute offerings and disk offerings. So in short, all we have to do here is, and I just had that other primary, this primary storage with this storage tag just to kind of point out how this differs from that approach. I am now going to get rid of the old tag and type in SolidFire to account. Now that is one of two tags that this primary storage requires. Every primary storage that is going to participate in the custom logic of this new storage allocator needs to have the storage tag SolidFire to account. The other tag it needs is the name. It's a tag whose value is the name of the account that owns this primary storage. So in this case, it's simply account-1. So we have two storage tags now. We have SolidFire to account, which is just a hard-coded value that every single primary storage that's participating in this custom logic needs to have. And then the other tag is the name of the account that owns this primary storage. Now, since I'm actually doing this in a development branch of CloudStack, I have noticed if I just hit the apply button here, and this has nothing to do with the demo, it's just some issue that's in the developer branch right now, an error message pops up because it thinks we have shrunk the size of the data store. To get around that, I'm just going to increase the size of the data store here, and that should solve that particular development issue. I'll hit the apply button, and now if I just take a look at the storage tags area, we can see here we have the SolidFire to account storage tag, and we have the other storage tag, which is account-1. And that's an interesting development issue as well, is that the storage tags hint is actually giving us the old one. Let me click on infrastructure, go into view all, go back into our primary storage, and now we can see probably it's got the proper tooltip. There we are, SolidFire to account and account-1. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for the other primary storage. I'll click on infrastructure, view all for primary storage, click on the name of our primary storage, go into edit mode. Now here I'm just going to get rid of the old tag and type SolidFire to account. And then for this one, I want it to use account2, so I'll type in that as a storage tag. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here and do that little development modification that is required for this development branch. And again, that has nothing to do with this feature. That's just, this is a development branch of CloudStack, and in those particular development branches, there are sometimes issues that haven't been addressed. So to get around this one, I'm just going to slightly increase the size of the primary storage. I'll hit the apply button, and here we are. We've got our storage tag field. with the values being SolidFire to account and account-2. Now it's time to try this out. So I'll go ahead and log out of the GUI. I was a root administrator to do those tasks. I'm now going to log in as username1. This particular user is part of account-1. So I'll hit login. And we can see here, I don't have any VMs, but I'd like to create one. So I'll go to the Instances tab. In the upper right, Add Instance. From a template, the vSphere template, which is selected. That's our one and only compute offering. Now remember, that compute offering has the storage tag SolidFire to account. It does not specify account-1 or account-2 as part of its storage tags, just SolidFire to account. I'll go to the disk offering and click on the close button here. Click on next, 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 next. Let's provide a name here, maybe VMVS1. VMVS1, and then hit the Launch VM button. Now I'm going to switch back to my Windows VM. I'm going to drag this pane up a bit, and we can see that we are deploying an OVF template to one of our primary storages. Now it should be, I'll highlight it, it should be the one that's highlighted. Let me go and right-click, go into Browse Data Store, and we can in fact see here, I'll click on the folder, that we are in the process of copying that OVF template to this particular folder. Let me hit the refresh button here. You can see there should be 6 files in here. And if we look down at the task area, we can see that we're in the process of cloning the virtual machine. So if I refresh this again, actually let me go to the root and refresh, we can see that we do have a new folder which is in preparation for our new virtual machine, which is almost done being deployed here. Yes, we've powered on the virtual machine. So if I refresh this, we can see that we have the appropriate name for our virtual machine. I'm going to double click this to go into that folder. I'm going to sort, make this a little bit easier for me to find it. Here's our VMDK file. This is the file that stores the contents of our root disk. I'll exit out of this data store now, switch back over to the hosts and clusters view, and we can see here that we have our virtual machine up and running. I just stands for instance. 6 is account ID 6, which in this case is mapped to account-1. And 59 is ID 59 for the VMs in the VM instance table that's in the cloud database. So this all looks really good. Now let's switch back over to the CloudStack GUI. I'm going to refresh this window here, and we can see our VM is up and running properly. I'll kind of just double check this in the notifications. This looks good. So we can now go and log out of here, and let's log in as our other user who is a part of account-2. So I'll log in. Now this particular user does not have any virtual machines. Let's click on the Instances tab, Add Instance in the upper right. Same thing as for the other user. Let's use a template, vSphere. I'm going to use the same exact compute offering. In fact, in this particular cloud, it's my only compute offering. But the gist here is that it is the same compute offering, and it has the tag, the storage tag SolidFire to account, which again does not, on that compute offering does not have any other storage tag. just SolidFire to account. I'll click on the Next button, dismiss this dialog, and just click Next a couple times here to get over to the review area. Now let me type in a name. I have to provide a unique name. VMVSA. I'll hit the Launch button, and now I'll switch over to our virtual machine hosting Windows. We can see up here we're in the process of creating a new virtual machine. I'll highlight in the task area we're deploying an OVF template. Now the very fact that we're deploying an OVF template instead of just cloning it indicates to me that we are dealing with a different data store. So if I switch over to the data stores and data store clusters area, we can see if I select the data store that is owned by account 2 and right click browse data store, we can see here, and most of this is already done, I'll select the folder that contains the downloaded template. We should see 6 files here. And then what we did, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so this looks good. We then had, through CloudStack's normal mechanisms, we cloned it and stored the contents of that in a new folder, root-60, which I've just selected. And we've powered on the virtual machine. We can see in the task area. Let me refresh this. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this. The folder had changed names in the process, so it wasn't finding the contents of the folder. But here we are. We have the files that are related to our new virtual machine, including the root-60 VMDK file, which stores the contents of the root disk for this particular virtual machine. Again, now I'll exit out of the data store browser, and I'll switch back to our hosts and clusters view. And we can see, and I'll highlight it here, this is our newest virtual machine. And just kind of comparing it name-wise to the prior one, you can see they both start with I, for instance. This one has the number 7, which is ID 7 in the account table, which maps to account-2. And so that can be compared against the prior VM, which was for account-1, which is ID 6 in the account table. And then we can see this is VM 60, so that's the ID 60 in the VM instance table, which makes sense. It's the next one up from the prior one, which was 59. So this all looks good. We've deployed our 2 virtual machines from 2 separate accounts using the same compute offering and making sure that their root disks end up on primary storage that is owned by that particular account. Now, in a similar fashion, we can do the same thing with data disks. And let me switch back over to the CloudStack interface. First of all, let me refresh this. Here we can see this particular virtual machine is up and running successfully. I'll go ahead and log out now. And then I'm going to log back in as a root administrator. And I want to create a disk offering. So I'll go down to the Service Offerings tab, click on that. Under Select Offering, I'll go to Disk Offerings. Upper right, I'll create a disk offering. Let's give it a name DO1. DO1 description sounds good. I'll just make something small here, just a 10 gigabyte disk. And all I need to do is click on that SolidFire 2 account storage tag, which CloudStack, the CloudStack GUI knows about. And I could either just leave this domain root, or I could click on the public checkbox. Now, since I had the checkbox unchecked for the compute offering and I just left domain root in that example, here what I'll do is I'll just click on the checkbox for public, just to exercise the other option. Now I'll hit the OK button, and this should be created in a moment. Okay, that's great. Just going to go ahead and clear the list. What I'd like to do now is log out of CloudStack as my root administrator, and I'm going to log in as the user from my account-1 account. I'll click on Login. Now I can go to the Storage tab, and that is my root disk. In the upper right, I'll click on the Add button, and I'll make a volume, vol-1. And I only have one disk offering, the one that I just created, so that's the one I'm going to use. I'll hit the OK button. As soon as that is added, we can go to the Quick View column and attach the disk to our one and only virtual machine for this particular account. I'll click on the OK button and switch over to my Windows VM. Now we can see some work's being done here to create that data disk. And in just a moment, it should be attached. Here we are. Reconfigure virtual machine at the end indicates it's attached. I'm going to go ahead and just highlight the virtual machine that we're dealing with. Now I can go over to our data stores view, and I'll click on the top data store. This is for account 1, which we're dealing with here. I'll right-click, go to Browse Data Store. I'm going to click on the folder for our virtual machine. I'm going to try to sort this a little bit. So we can see here, I highlighted it. That is our data disk. Now, if I exit out of here, and we want to do the same thing with our other account, we'll switch back over to the CloudStack GUI. I'll log out from, log this user out, and log the other user in, and really just do the same thing. I'll go to the Storage tab, Add in the upper right. I'll provide a name. I'll use our one and only disk offering. So again, this is a disk offering that's shared by both accounts, even though it just has that one and only storage tag, SolidFire to account. I'll hit the OK button. As soon as this is added, I'll go to the Quick View column, click on Attach, attach it to my virtual machine, then switch over here, and in just a moment we'll see, and I'm going to highlight it right now, and this process should be done. I'll highlight it. We've attached our new data disk to our virtual machine. I'll right-click and browse this data store. Click on the appropriate folder. I'm going to sort this and expand that column. Click on that. That's our data disk. So, switching back to CloudStack, I'm going to exit out of, or log out of the GUI from this account, go back in as a root admin, and perform just a quick summary of everything that we saw here. Within the infrastructure, primary storage, what I did was I created two primary storages with the intent that one be dedicated to one account and the other to a different account, which is something that you could already do using storage tagging, but not easily without duplicating compute offerings, unless you were willing to do a custom compute offering, which means that you would allow your end users to pick their own options around CPU cores and megahertz rating and memory and stuff like that. But what we want to do here is, as the administrator, we'd like to provide some prepackaged compute offerings, but we don't want to duplicate basically the same thing for every single account. And so if I click on either one of these primary storages, we can see that the way we did that was by using this special SolidFire to account storage tag along with another storage tag that is the name of the account that owns this primary storage. Once we had that in place, along with our compute or our disk offering, and let's go back into our compute offering, for example, we can scroll down to the storage tag area, and we can see that our storage tag is simply the SolidFire to account hard-coded value. This lets our custom storage allocator know that there's something special about this particular compute offering or disk offering, and that not only do we need to match it against a primary storage with that particular storage tag, which is business as usual, but in addition to that, the primary storage also has to have another storage tag that matches the name of the account that's associated with either the root or data disk that we're making use of. So in this way, we can have a functionality akin to the dedication of hosts to particular domains or accounts. We can have that similar functionality with primary storage. And one advantage of that is, and I'll switch over to the infrastructure tab here, go into primary storage. One advantage of that is that we can now tell account 1, not only do you have X amount of capacity for which you can carve out virtual disks, but you have Y amount of performance. And nobody else can use your performance. Now you have to decide with your virtual disks how that performance gets carved up, but at least nobody else can take that performance away from your account. And the same thing if I look at this other primary storage aimed at another account. Now they could have differing sizes, differing performance levels, but whatever this primary storage has belongs to that account and only to that account. And just like no one else can take the capacity of that primary storage away from this account, no one else in a different account can take away the performance of this particular primary storage from this account. So that is in total what I look to summarize in this video, and thanks for watching.